10. Post-wedding murder. Shaylin Moran and Jack Dougherty had been in a long-distance relationship through the internet for several weeks before they finally met in person. In person, they immediately got engaged and planned a murder. They literally met one day before they brutally killed 54-year-old Cheryl Smith in the doorway of her own home. This happened in Pawtucket, Rhode Island. On December 31, 2019, Jack Dougherty proposed and Shaylin Moran said yes. But one of the requirements was that the next day, January 1, 2020, they go out and kill whoever was to answer the door of Shaylin's ex-boyfriend's house. Shaylin had been dating a guy named Leonard Trofield before she met Jack, but they had issues with domestic violence, with Shaylin claiming Leonard used to beat her up. So Jack agreed that he would make him pay for the crimes. What nobody expected was that when Jack knocked on Leonard's door, his mother would answer. But it didn't seem to matter. Jack pointed his gun and shot her several times in the chest. Even though she was quickly rushed to the hospital, the old woman died. After Jack committed this brutal murder, he ordered a ride from an app on his phone and waited patiently to get in. Once he was leaving the crime scene, he texted Shaylin Moran, telling her, "This is for life." But it wasn't for life, unless he meant a life behind bars. Then totally. They were caught a couple days later by the police and arrested. Since Jack was the murderer who actually pulled the trigger, he got life behind bars. And even though Shaylin didn't physically do the killing, she also got life in prison for conspiracy to commit murder. 9. Designer killer. Roderick Deacon White, 38 years old, was once a successful graphic designer, but after he got into an argument with his fiancée over his new fetish for cross-dressing, he became a murderer. The two had been arguing about his strange new obsession when she admitted that she had been cheating on him. In a blind fit of rage, Roderick then hit her with a metal bar in the face until she was dead. The murderous fiancée then left Amy Parsons in a pool of her own blood and fled the scene. But Roderick was not on the run for very long. Consumed by guilt, he handed himself in to the police the next day and admitted that he was a murderer. He confessed that everything was his fault. He knew that his cross-dressing fetish was making her uncomfortable, and he wasn't surprised that it drove her into the arms of another man. He also admitted that his anger got the best of him, and he should never have beaten her to death with that metal pole. But for all of his confessing, it didn't do him much good. The jury also didn't really care, and they definitely didn't sympathize. Here's the real tragedy. Police say that Roderick beat Amy while she was in the shower, then ran away while she lay in the bath drowning in her own blood. It took over 30 minutes for her to die. She gasped for breath in the bathtub, alone and scared. Roderick has since been sentenced to 17 years in jail. 8. The abuser. In an absolutely bizarre turn of events, a woman caught her fiancé sexually assaulting one of her bridesmaids. Then she married him anyway. It was 2 days before the wedding. Daniel J. Carney spent his afternoon leisurely floating along the Delaware River in Pennsylvania as part of his wedding party. The groomsmen, bridesmaids, and everyone was drinking beer and vodka. When they got back to their hotel, Daniel's fiancée asked if he would kindly walk her drunk friend back to her room. The woman was so drunk that she could barely walk. She was swaying, slurring her words, and was struggling just to stay on her 2 feet. What happened next is going to shock you. Instead of walking the drunk woman back to her room, the bad fiancé dragged her into the men's locker room, took her into the showers, and began assaulting her. In the middle of the act, the bride walked in and caught him red-handed. What happened after was a whole lot of drama. Daniel was charged with felony sexual assault in Pennsylvania, with the state police using security footage from the hotel to secure their conviction. They also looked at text messages between Daniel and the victim. One of the messages was Daniel asking the woman to take the morning after pill, and to put on a happy face for the wedding, and this was after he assaulted her. But even as the groom was being charged for assaulting the bridesmaid, the wedding went ahead as planned. Apparently, his fiancée doesn't know a red flag when she sees one. 7. In need of a ring. A man from Texas proposed to his girlfriend. She said yes, and they were due to get married. But one day before the wedding, the individual found himself in a tough spot. The fiancé didn't actually have enough money to pay for a wedding ring. He also didn't have enough money to pay for the ceremony. So, being the super reasonable guy that he was, he decided to rob a bank. The last-minute bank robbery really didn't go the way the guy hoped. Heath Edward Bumpus, a native of Crockett, walked into the Citizens State Bank. He approached the teller, let her know that he had a weapon, and told her to give him all the money. He got away with a bit of cash, but his face was captured by surveillance footage. Sheriff Woody Wallace immediately took the footage and put it all over the internet. He was hoping that somebody who saw Heath's face on Facebook would be able to recognize him. Somebody did recognize Heath. It was his fiancée. She couldn't believe what was happening when Heath turned up on her Facebook feed as a bank robber. But rather than trying to help her husband to be out of a sticky situation, she called him and ordered that he turn himself in. She said there was no way he would get away with the crime and he needed to turn himself over to the police before things got ugly. Thankfully, that's exactly what he did. He's now being charged with aggravated robbery. As for the wedding, it's on hold for the time being. 6. The wedding planner. Mark and Eliza spent 4 years in a relationship. One of those years was spent dating, while the other 3 they were engaged. But throughout their long engagement, Mark had a bit of an issue with falling in love with just about every other woman that he came across. He never physically cheated on Eliza, but he repeatedly got attached to other women. Yet despite this serious issue, Eliza never broke off their engagement. They just kept with it, all the way up until their wedding. And that was when everything went terribly wrong. At least it did for the bride. The couple hired a young wedding planner by the name of Tasha. She was supposed to help make the couple's wedding day something to remember forever. Instead, Mark fell in love with Tasha, called off the wedding, and ran away with her. Eliza was left to clean up the mess, while Mark and his new fiancée vanished. What do you think of this bizarre situation? Was it Eliza's fault for sticking with this guy even though he kept falling in love with other women? Or do you think Mark should be tracked down and punished? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons. 5. Murder after the wedding. In Louisiana, a groom did a little bit of murdering on his wedding day. It was July 31st, and Devin Jose Jones had just finished getting married. He was on his way home with his new bride and one of his male friends. But a car crash on the I-10 near New Orleans caused them to get stuck in traffic. As they sat in the car together, Jones began getting suspicious that his new wife had been fooling around with his friend. He accused them of the affair. Things got heated in the car, and so Jones opened up his door and stepped out. He then pulled out a gun and started firing at his wife and friend who were still in the vehicle. One bullet struck his friend in the leg, while another hit a totally random car and penetrated somebody's hand. During the shooting, Jones's wife managed to flag down an ambulance and hide inside of it. Since there was a traffic accident up ahead, police and paramedics were already close at hand. The cops quickly apprehended the groom, while paramedics took the injured parties to the nearby hospital, where they were in stable condition. Jones was charged with attempted first-degree murder and will probably spend the rest of his life in jail. The big issue is going to be for his wife, who now has to file for divorce from the man who tried to murder her. 4. Bleach and a mop. Patrick Frazee was due to be married to Kelsey Bereth. The couple got engaged just after meeting in March of 2016. Kelsey moved all that way to Colorado to be with Patrick, yet they never actually lived together. Kelsey lived in her own condo while Patrick had his own place. In early December, Kelsey was reported missing. Patrick was the initial person of interest, but he cooperated with the authorities fully. He even told them that he had broken off the wedding several days before, and that he hadn't seen her since near the end of November. For a while, the cops actually believed Patrick, but then they found a bottle of bleach and a mop at Kelsey's place. Both tested positive for blood. They quickly arrested Patrick in connection to her disappearance, along with Patrick's ex-girlfriend, Crystal Lee Kenny. With a bit of interrogation, the police were able to get Crystal to confess that she had helped Patrick clean up the evidence after he beat his fiancée to death with a baseball bat. She also told the authorities that Patrick had tried to recruit her to help kill Kelsey at least 3 times previously. He had tried to get his ex-girlfriend to poison Kelsey's coffee. But why? Why get engaged to somebody, have them move to your hometown, and then beat them to death with a bat? We never did get an answer to this, as Patrick just turned out to be a complete psychopath. He was a lunatic, and now he's locked up behind bars with no possibility of parole. 3. So you married an axe murderer. A Russian travel agent named Alexander Voronin, the son of a senior ex-KGB officer, brutally beat his fiancée just days before their wedding. Marina Pankrotova, just 26 years old, was discovered half-naked in bed after being viciously attacked by her fiancé for over 3 hours. According to the evidence that appeared in a Moscow courtroom, the fiancé beat the poor woman with the blunt end of an axe, severely mutilating her face and fracturing her skull. He may also have beaten her with a chair leg. Unfortunately, the woman was dead by the time the authorities found her. The fiancé was then caught by the police as he tried to flee the country, but ran into some problems. All travel had been suspended due to the pandemic travel restrictions. He couldn't even escape the country because of COVID. The police tracked him down after he took a car from a rental company and got stuck at the border. He has since been given 14 years in prison, of which he's expected to serve every last year. 2. Stolen rings. A man in Florida has been accused of proposing to his girlfriend using the exact same engagement ring and the exact same wedding band that he stole from the previous woman he had been dating. According to the Volusia Sheriff's Office, Joseph L. Davis went by 2 names. He called himself Joe Brown when with one girlfriend and Marcus Brown when with the other. His last girlfriend discovered his new engagement when she checked Joseph's new girlfriend's Facebook page. She noticed that he had pictures with a woman wearing the exact same engagement ring that he had given her. When she checked the jewelry box, she found both rings missing. In total, the 2 rings are worth about $6,000. She reached out to the new girlfriend, told her the situation, and things went south very quickly for Joseph. The new girlfriend gave back the missing jewelry, and together the 2 women went to the police. Joseph then fled and is still at large, with the cops hoping to catch him and charge him on counts of theft. And suffice to say, his relationship with both women has been terminated. 1. FBI's Most Wanted. In the summer of 2021, the FBI added Brian Laundrie to their most wanted list for his possible connection to the murder of Gabby Petito. The couple had been on a cross-country trip visiting various national parks throughout places like Colorado, Wyoming, and Utah. But then on August 27th, Gabby's phone was suddenly turned off and her mother could no longer get a hold of her. Gabby was only 22 years old. Her mother phoned the police, who then discovered her brutalized remains in a campground. They also found the white Ford Transit van that the couple had been traveling in. It was parked outside Brian's parents' house, where he had been living with Gabby for the last 2 years. But here's the deal. Brian Laundrie is currently missing. He returned home on September 1st, hired an attorney, and then went missing immediately after he was named a person of interest. His parents actually phoned the FBI to tell them that Brian went on a hike and has yet to return. They are obviously covering for him, though the FBI have been unable to get any information on his current whereabouts. They searched his home, questioned his parents, and are doing everything they can to track this guy down. Police believe that for an unknown reason, Brian turned on his girlfriend, strangled her to death, and then tried to cover his tracks. He is now fleeing across the country, literally right now, as of September 2021. He could be anywhere, maybe even hiding out in a neighborhood near you.
Number 9. Ryan Perez. Ryan Perez was a Philadelphia police officer with an impeccable record. The 30-year-old had been on the force for 5 years without any complaints being made against him. But his squeaky clean record didn't stop him from losing his job recently over a fight he got into with his neighbor back in 2019. As a cop, Perez had experience handling disputes between neighbors, but he apparently failed to peacefully resolve a disagreement that resulted in him being charged with public intoxication, criminal mischief, and disorderly conduct. The officer allegedly broke his neighbor's window during the off-duty incident. A police spokesperson confirmed that Perez had been suspended with intent to dismiss, but wouldn't give many details about the case. A source familiar with the situation told local papers that the fight happened after an ongoing dispute between Perez and his neighbor reached its tipping point. Perez hired a lawyer and is fighting to clear his name and get his job back. The police department had made it clear that the commissioner is standing by his decision to fire the former officer, who he believes violated policy with his unbecoming conduct. Number 8. Luany Valeria Salazar Zamora. 23-year-old Luany Zamora vanished in the Costa Rican province of Cartago in June of last year. She was last seen with a young man from her neighborhood named Kenneth Mejia, who claims he parted ways with her at a local mall. When Luany's family didn't hear from her, they knew something was wrong. It was totally unlike her to go silent for long periods and did not keep them updated on her whereabouts. Meanwhile, just days after her disappearance, Mejia skipped town. The family pleaded with the police to investigate some leads, but law enforcement was slow to move on the case. Feeling like they had no other choice than to take matters into their own hands, Luany's loved ones began their own search for her. The young woman's brother, Jose Zamora, noticed a suspicious patch of freshly disturbed ground outside the house Mejia lived in with his grandmother before fleeing the law. He began to dig and unearthed a bag with Luany's body inside. She had been stabbed to death. Kenneth Mejia was found guilty of homicide and received a 19-year prison sentence. Number 7. Dean Keller versus Jeffrey Weigel. Indianapolis firefighter Dean Keller and his wife had lived in their Greenwood, Indiana home for years when their new neighbor, Jeffrey Weigel, moved in next door. The two men got along fine for a while, but that all changed one day in 2009. Keller was outside training the family's puppy when Weigel accused him of being on his property. Weigel also seemed bothered to learn that Keller was a military veteran. 15 police reports were filed over the next 8 years as tensions continued to escalate between the neighbors. On one occasion, the Kellers accused Weigel of luring their dogs over to his yard and threatening to kill them. Another time, Weigel claimed that Keller's dog had run into his yard and bitten him. Things came to blows when Weigel allegedly pulled a knife on Keller's dog. They wrestled each other to the ground as Keller tried to get the knife out of Weigel's hand. Both men were arrested for battery, but the charges were dropped. The verbal confrontations continued and were often peppered with threats of violence from Weigel. He allegedly threw firecrackers at the Keller's dogs, spat on Dean, swung a baseball bat at him, stabbed him with a fork, and more. Concerned for his family's safety, Keller installed a security camera facing Weigel's property. The long-standing feud reached a boiling point in 2017 when the two men exchanged words from across the fence that separated their yards. Weigel pulled a gun. Before he could shoot, Keller pulled his own gun out and fired 11 rounds. Jeff was rushed to the hospital in critical condition, but survived. Police determined that Keller acted in self-defense and arrested Weigel. He pled guilty to criminal recklessness and was sentenced to time served. The police were called one more time after that, but it appears as though the neighbors have finally learned to leave each other alone. Number 6. Kenneth Hoyle and Bobby DePaul. 69-year-old Kenny Hoyle and his wife initially got along with Bobby DePaul and August Dempsey, the 40-something couple who lived next door to them in Philadelphia's Frankford neighborhood. But when Bobby decided to build a large shed on his small property, Hoyle reported him for not having the proper permit. The city fined Bobby and ordered him to take the shed down, but he fought the case. In the meantime, he had an explosive outburst and threatened to kill Hoyle, only to act perfectly pleasant the next day, as if nothing had happened. It became clear that Bobby, who had an alleged history of alcohol abuse, was getting out of hand with his drinking again. Bobby won his appeal to keep his shed, and Kenny was outraged. He made a habit of calling the cops on Bobby over trivial matters, and their confrontations became even more heated. Everyone involved in the rivalry became miserable as the war took over their lives. Hoyle accused Bobby of throwing a cinder block through his car window, dumping a bucket full of maggots on his porch, and poisoning his dog to death. Bobby adamantly denied killing the dog, but did whatever he could to try getting his neighbor to move. He blared music, shined bright lights into Hoyle's home, and destroyed Kenny's fence in a booze-fueled campaign of destruction. Hoyle came to the police, but they were unable to rush to the scene because they were dealing with another serious crime. In the early hours of the morning, he dialed 911 again and told the dispatcher that he shot and killed Bobby in August. He initially tried claiming that he acted in self-defense, but surveillance footage showed that the couple was unarmed when he opened fire on them. The senior citizen was found guilty of murdering the pair and received a 66-year prison sentence. What would you do if your relationship with your neighbors turned violent? Would you move? Let us know in the comments. Make sure to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Number 5. Former cop turned criminal. Mark and Diane Zander hope to be friends with their new neighbors, Pete and Barbara Richter. Pete was a former Baltimore police officer who had built a home for retirement in Stevensonville, Maryland. The Zanders saw the couple outside one day and introduced themselves. It seemed like they were going to get along just fine. Someone vandalized the Richters' home before they even moved in, causing $20,000 worth of damage. When Pete heard that Mark and another resident had been seen peering in one of his windows, he accused Zander of committing the crime. There was no evidence of Mark being responsible, and nobody was arrested in the case. The Zanders chalked the situation up to a misunderstanding and vowed to continue trying to get along with the Richters. But Pete clung to his anger. He made enemies with several other neighbors, often complaining about slight disturbances that members of the community were tolerant of, like loud music, teens playing sports and riding ATVs outside, and a truck driver parking his semi on the street on weekends. In 2001, the Zanders' house mysteriously burned down. Investigators were unable to determine its origins. The family suspected Pete of arson, but loved their neighborhood too much to leave. Even though other residents were starting to move to get away from the Richters, they rebuilt the house. The animosity went on for 14 years. One day, Pete lured the Zanders' dog into his yard. Mark went to retrieve the dog and was accused of trespassing. He was trying to leave when Richter pulled out a gun and shot him twice in the back. Richter claimed that he shot Mark in self-defense, but a jury found him guilty of second-degree murder. He's currently serving a 25-year prison sentence. Number 4. Eric Martin Hildebrand. A lot of neighborly rivalries that got out of hand started over petty disagreements and escalate into full-blown war. In October of last year, Anita Braddock complained to code enforcement about her neighbor's bright light shining into her home at night. An officer visited the property and found that 62-year-old Timothy Patch and his wife, Rhonda, were indeed violating a county code that bans disruptive outdoor lighting. The couple received a warning and were given 2 weeks to correct the problem. When they failed to heed the order, they received another warning, letting them know that they could incur fines of up to $1,000 per day if they don't do what they were told. They finally listened and turned off the light. Anita, who lived with her 61-year-old brother, Eric Martin Hildebrand, emailed officials to let them know that the problem had been remedied. Unfortunately, that wasn't the end of it. Just weeks later, Patch and Hildebrand got into an argument outside their homes. Hildebrand shot and killed Patch in his driveway, then went home and turned the gun on himself. A neighbor told local news station that both men had lived in the community for less than a year, and police confirmed that neither resident had ever filed a criminal complaint against the other. Nobody went into detail about what caused things to boil over, but family members said that the dispute leading up to the rivalry was about more than just a light. Number 3. Landlord lashes out. 61-year-old Ellen Wink found herself feeling fed up last year when her tenant stopped paying his rent on the room he rented in her Norwalk, Connecticut home. The landlord and former city clerk told 54-year-old Kurt Lametta, who had lived at the home for 2 years, that she was selling the house and he had to move. But Lametta didn't leave, and the two became embroiled in a bitter back and forth as Wink became increasingly frustrated with the situation. She was arrested in September after allegedly taking all of Lametta's belongings to the dump and illegally locking him out of the home. The exasperated landlord had no choice but to let him back in. The ongoing drama reached a whole new level recently when Wink fatally shot Lametta at the residence. She dialed 911 and told the operator that Lametta had come after her because she was cleaning up. According to court documents, she told officers at the scene that her tenant had been driving her nuts. Wink is being held on a $1 million bond for murder. Her lawyer told news outlets that the defense is exploring multiple options, including self-defense. Number 2. Racist rampage. Jennifer McLegan is a nurse and single mom who lives in the Valley Stream suburb of Long Island, New York. After moving into her home in 2017, dog dew and dead squirrels began appearing in her yard. Someone also kept firing a pellet gun into her lawn. She suspected that her neighbor, 57-year-old John McEnany, was behind the disturbing acts. For 3 years, the man and his girlfriend, who were white, had embarked on a cruel campaign of intimidation against McLegan, who was African American. She told reporters that the couple told her and other black residents to go back to where they came from, brandish guns, and wore blackface as a way to taunt her. Police were aware of the situation and had responded to numerous calls about the harassment, but McLegan became frustrated because they didn't seem to be doing much about her complaints. She posted large signs outside her house describing what was happening to her. Upon learning of the situation, community members and activists joined together and marched through the neighborhood in support of McLegan. She finally caught McEnany in the act after installing a surveillance camera, and he was arrested. His girlfriend, 53-year-old Mindy Kanarick, was also charged for her alleged role in the crimes. Kanarick agreed to undergo diversity and inclusion training in exchange for a 1-year conditional discharge. McEnany pled guilty to criminal mischief and was sentenced to 3 years of probation. He had to complete anti-racism training, and the judge issued an order of protection, banning the couple from contact with McLegan. Hopefully, this marks the end of her long, drawn-out battle for the right to live peacefully and safely. And number 1. Justin James Ludington. People will go to some crazy extremes when they're desperate to get rid of a neighbor they don't want to get along with. Some try to harass the rival resident into moving, while others resort to murder. And sometimes they burn their enemy's house down. Late last year, police in Lake Okeechobee, Florida, responded to a call about a house fire. They found the home engulfed in flames as firefighters battled to put the blaze out. The homeowner carried her disabled mother-in-law outside, and they both thankfully survived. But the house and everything in it was destroyed, along with the 2 vehicles in the driveway. Witnesses told detectives that they had seen the neighbor, Justin James Ludington, hitting the home with a hammer and threatening to burn it down. He had allegedly set some wood pallets on fire outside and calmly walked away, saying, "Let it burn." Community members said that Ludington and the victims had been entangled in a long-standing dispute, but nobody elaborated on the details. The suspect turned himself into the sheriff and was charged with first-degree arson of an occupied structure and 2 counts of second-degree arson of a vehicle. He's been held on $70,000 bail while the case waits to play out in court. The victims told reporter Diane Sawyer that the flames were tall, bright, and spreading fast when they fled the home. Even though they had lost everything, they knew that they were lucky to be alive.
Number 10. Marrying the Killer. Edith Casas fell in love with the last man you would ever expect. In 2013, Edith was so crazy for this guy that she married him while he was still in jail. But the craziest thing about it all is that he was in jail for murdering her identical twin sister. It was a pretty grim ceremony to say the least. One of the witnesses was a guard at the jail. The bride was attacked by people throwing rocks and eggs after the service, and she's now one of the most hated women in all of Argentina. He wouldn't exactly call it a dream wedding. Just 3 years earlier, Victor Cingolani, the lucky groom, killed Edith's sister, Johanna Casas, days before her 20th birthday. Police discovered her body abandoned in a field near the small town of Pico Truncado in Argentina. She had 2 bullet wounds to the head. Police immediately suspected Victor, since he was her former boyfriend. The other suspect was a man she had been living with at the time she was killed. All of them had been seen at a party just a few hours before her death. Victor was ultimately found guilty of the murder, beyond any shadow of doubt. Edith later reached out to him in jail, and they started exchanging letters and eventually began a relationship. They fell in love. He's managed to convince Edith that he had nothing to do with the murder of her sister and that he's been falsely imprisoned. But in reality, police were able to prove he really did put 2 bullets in Johanna's head. Nonetheless, Edith's waiting for his 13 years in prison to be over so they can finally be together forever. Number 9. The woman who married a ghost. Amanda Teague, a 45-year-old woman from Northern Ireland, married a ghost. Not just any ghost, but the spirit of a pirate named Jack, who's been dead for 3 centuries. Wait, what? Yep, you heard that correctly. The romantic couple had a private wedding ceremony on a boat in international waters off the Irish coast. This was the only way she could make the marriage legal. She even hired a medium for the ceremony. That way it wasn't too one-sided. The medium said that Jack agreed to the wedding, which made the union official on paper. And since Jack had no physical body to put a ring on her finger, Amanda held a candle with a ring on it, which symbolized Jack. But don't worry, this story gets even weirder. Their love affair started a little while earlier in 2014. Jack's ghost visited her as she was lying in bed. She had to do some research to figure out that Jack was a pirate from the 18th century who had been abandoned at the altar and then executed for being a thief. Amanda interacted with the entity over a few months, developed feelings for him, and then finally decided to go through with the marriage. But the marriage only lasted about a year. She has since divorced the ghost, warning people on social media that they should be careful when dabbling in spirituality. It really makes you wonder what the ghost could have possibly done to her. Number 8. A romantic murderer. A woman had the worst internet date of her life when she accidentally went out with a man who had just killed someone. The killer then tried to use her house as a hiding place. She had absolutely no idea that David Iwo had bludgeoned a retired lawyer named Martin Decker to death with a hammer just a few hours earlier. David, who happened to be homeless, posed as a sex worker in an online advertisement for gay men. When Martin led him into his house for a 2-hour appointment, David caved his skull in with his trusty hammer, and then stole all his stuff and ran away. In the midst of all this murdering, David still had time to do some romantic internet dating. He managed to convince a woman to go on a date with him. He ended up back at her house, but then refused to leave. What started as a perfectly innocent encounter turned into a terror as this woman realized she could not get David out of her house. She eventually called the police, who helped him to vacate the premises. But what the police also found was that David had left behind the claw hammer that he used to kill Martin underneath the unidentified woman's bed. The police used it as evidence to help put David behind bars. Number 7. Anime obsessed. A man in Japan fell in love with something that might be even stranger than a ghost. His name is Akihiko Kondo, and he's a respectable school administrator with a fairly normal life. That's what makes it so strange that he decided to marry a hologram. He had a wedding in November of 2018, in which he married a cyber celebrity named Hatsune Miku. It wasn't recognized legally, but at least it made the man happy. His house on the outskirts of Tokyo is covered in Miku dolls and toys. He's completely obsessed with the character, and now he's with her for life. And when I say he married a hologram, what I mean is that he married a device that kind of looks like a coffee maker. The glass container at the core of the device contains a flickering holographic version of Miku. She just kind of floats around in the device all day, although she is equipped with artificial intelligence. What this means is that she's basically a glorified Google Smart Home, able to turn off the lights, give readings, and have the occasional system meltdown. Do you think relationships like this will become more common as technology continues to advance? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons if you haven't already. Number 6. A violent love triangle. A shocking incident went down at a traffic light in the Bronx when a failed love triangle erupted in an explosion of murder and vengeance. Lisbeth Mass, a 52-year-old woman, was shot to death on the sidewalk by her jealous suitor, a man named Jose Everaldo Reyes. According to city police, Jose targeted Lisbeth on purpose, waiting for her lunch break to walk up and shoot her 6 times in broad daylight. And yet, that's not the scariest part. As she lay down on the sidewalk, Jose calmly walked back to his bicycle, jammed his gun into his waistband as if nothing had happened, and attempted to just cycle away. That was when Dwayne Walker sprang into action. Dwayne was Lisbeth's boyfriend, and he saw the whole thing unfold before his mortified eyes. He jumped in his Hyundai Sonata, peeled around onto the street, and then drove full speed at the man who had just shot down his girlfriend. He rammed him with his car, sending Jose and his bicycle flying. Then he backed up over him, trying to crush Jose with his tires. Jose managed to wriggle free and limp away on foot, but Dwayne chased him, pushed him onto the hood of somebody's car, and began to pummel him in the face. Police quickly arrived and wrestled Dwayne off the old man, but by then he had been beaten pretty bad. But of course, it's hard to feel sympathy for Jose, considering he shot a woman in a jealous fit of rage. You see, Jose and Lisbeth frequently had lunch together, but weren't actually in a relationship. He liked her, but she didn't like him. He grew enraged after finding out she had a boyfriend and had put him into the friend zone, and so he went out that morning for some revenge. Number 5. Marrying her mother. A woman from Oklahoma was sent to jail after she got busted marrying her own daughter. Patricia Ann Spann, 45, was found guilty of felony incest after she admitted to hosting a wedding in which she hooked up with her biological daughter, Misty Velvet Dawn Spann, 26. Patricia had lost custody of her kids a few years earlier. When she reunited with her daughter in 2014, the pair hit it off in a rather unexpected way. After same-sex marriage became legal in Oklahoma in 2016, they wasted no time in getting married. And as if that wasn't twisted enough, just wait until you hear the rest. Investigators also discovered that Patricia had previously married a different one of her children, her 18-year-old son. But that marriage had been annulled in 2010 and found unlawful. According to the local Oklahoma newspaper, Misty was most angry about the fact that her mother had tricked her. Not tricked into getting married, but tricked by the fact that her mother said the marriage would be legal. She claimed that her mom consulted 3 different attorneys, who all said there would be no problems with them getting married. When she found out that the union was not in fact legal, she had it annulled. Imagine being divorced twice, both times from your own kids. Both women have been charged, with the daughter getting 10 years of probation and mandatory counseling. Her mother has to serve 8 years of probation after a short prison term and will have to register as a sex offender. Number 4. On one condition. Serial killer Joanna Dennehy has fallen in love with a street robber named Haley Palmer in a bizarre and rather dangerous union. Joanna proposed to the street robber herself after they fell in love while serving time behind bars together at the HMP Bronzefield Women's Prison. Haley served a 16-year sentence for robbing people in the street and has since being released. But Joanna still has quite a bit of time to serve. In fact, Joanna will never get out of jail. She is one of the worst female killers in modern English history. She's also one of only 2 women serving life sentences right now in the UK. She was branded pure evil by criminal psychologists. They say the only reason she committed the murders was because she found it fun. Her first victim was a roommate, a guy named Lucas. She convinced him to meet her in a rural area under the pretense that they would have intercourse. But instead of taking off his pants, she stabbed him in the heart with a knife and then ditched his corpse. The week after, Joanna killed a veteran named John Chapman, also with a knife. And then later that same day, she attacked her landlord Kevin and stabbed him in the neck. When she started, she just couldn't help herself. She would have gone on killing every day if possible, if not for the police catching her a few hours after the 3rd murder. And now she's serving a life sentence. But hey, at least she's found love. Number 3. Serial killer lover. A British woman named Tracy Bottomley has never actually met her fiancé, seeing as he is currently locked in an American prison. Nonetheless, she says that she's prepared for whatever trouble being married to a serial killer might bring her way. Tracy is currently engaged to Ernest Otto Smith, a man who was jailed for life for killing a man and a woman back in 2006. He's in jail without parole, so it's not like he and Tracy will ever go for a midnight picnic. She fell in love with the murderer in 2018 after they started speaking as part of a bizarre pen pal scheme. She was quoted as saying, "Yeah, he's committed a few murders, but I understand the risks." She also says Ernest doesn't scare her in the slightest. They haven't tied the knot just yet, but Tracy is hoping to fly from the UK to the US soon. There, the lovebirds will get married at the Ohio Department of Prisons. Number 2. Love on Death Row. A woman in Texas has decided that she will marry a serial killer sitting on death row. According to Dawn Arguello, mass killer Nico Jenkins is a very sensitive man. But if you ask anybody else, he's a vicious monster. Jenkins is responsible for a killing spree in August of 2013 that went on for 10 days. He terrorized Omaha, killing 4 people before eventually being caught and sentenced to death. He's now sitting on death row in Nebraska with no chance of getting away. This is despite the fact that he cut off his own boy part in a desperate bid to be declared insane. But after mutilating himself, killing a handful of people, and sitting on death row for a while, Jenkins is now in love. He's even tattooed Dawn's name right on his face. He met his bride-to-be when she volunteered as part of an advocate group for inmates on death row. The couple is now inseparable, except of course for the fact that they can't actually touch or be together. And then of course there's the terrible fact that the marriage will come to a swift end as soon as Nebraska gets around to killing Nico Jenkins. He'll be the first execution in Nebraska since 1977, when savage killer Robert Williams was given the electric chair. Number 1. Crystal Strauss and her brother's killer. Crystal Strauss married the man who killed her half-brother 40 years after his conviction. Crystal, a native of Cleveland, Ohio, tied the knot even while John Tejan was still on house arrest for the horrendous crime he committed in the 1980s. Brian McGarry had been John's best friend and roommate in 1987 when he was discovered with a gunshot to the head and a single stab wound. When the police interrogated John, he admitted that he had killed Brian, although he had claimed it was in self-defense. Nonetheless, he went on to spend 32 years locked up in jail. The unlikely relationship between the victim's half-sister and the victim's killer started in the 80s as well. John wrote her a letter explaining that he was completely innocent. She believed him, and they continued to share correspondence and to have visits until he finally proposed over the phone in 2020. Nothing like a phone proposal to get those romantic juices going. After being released from prison, John and Crystal shacked up and are now living happily ever after. Crystal is still in denial that John shot her brother in the face. Thanks for watching. Which of these bizarre romances do you think is the most twisted? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and be sure to hit that subscribe button for more videos like these. See you next time. Bye!